Picture this. You sit down at your desk, you're fully caffeinated, and you are like determined to finally write that critical report. Or, maybe draft a massive strategic proposal.
Oh, I know this feeling.
Right. So you boot up the computer, but out of the corner of your eye, you spot this unresolved email thread or like a memo you were supposed to look at yesterday. And you tell yourself, I'll just skim this for 20 minutes, just to get my brain warmed up.
Just 20 minutes, yeah.
Exactly. Cut to 2 hours later, you have somehow reorganized your entire digital filing system, cleared out your inbox, and drafted 3 totally low-priority replies. But your core high-stakes document is completely blank.
Completely untouched.
Why do our brains actively sabotage us when we are under pressure?
It is a brilliant question, honestly, and it points to a deeply embedded psychological trap. We assume that when the pressure is on, human beings naturally rise to the occasion and prioritize the most important tasks.
Right. Flight or fight, we get it done.
But cognitively, the exact opposite happens. When we are overwhelmed, our brain just seeks the path of least resistance.
And that biological glitch is exactly what we are diagnosing and, treating in today's deep dive.
Right.
We are pulling from a truly fascinating source today.
Yeah, it's great material.
It's this comprehensive script originally designed for PhD scholars who are just desperately trying to survive that relentless, high-pressure, publish or perish culture of modern academia.
Which is an incredibly intense environment.
Oh, totally.
Mm-hmm.
But our mission today is much broader. We are going to extract these evidence-based, high-level time management frameworks from that academic world and show how they can rescue absolutely anyone who feels like they're drowning in demands.
Yeah.
You really do not need to be defending a dissertation to use this material.
No, because the cognitive traps are universal. I mean, whether you are a lead researcher, a startup executive, or honestly, a parent trying to manage a chaotic household schedule.
It all applies.
It does. But I do want to set clear expectations for you, the listener, right away. We are not going to talk about writing basic, static to-do lists today.
Good, because those never work for me.
Exactly. A simple list on a sticky note will not save you when the structural pressure of your week peaks. What we are exploring is a self-regulated cognitive and behavioral process. It's about engineering a system that works with your underlying psychology rather than, constantly fighting against it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can start engineering a flawless schedule, we really need to understand the pathology of a ruined day. The source material expands on that opening scenario in a way that it is painfully recognizable.
Yeah, the cascade of failure usually starts with a single distraction, but it accelerates rapidly.
Right. So right after you've spent 2 hours avoiding your main project, the phone rings. It's your boss, or in the academic context, your advisor.
Always bad timing.
Always. And they casually mention they are going on sabbatical, which means your massive, terrifying project deadline has just been moved forward by 6 full months.
Wow. Instant panic.
Instant. You physically shove your notes aside and start frantically trying to build a new timeline. But just as your stress spikes, a peer knocks on your office door in tears because of a personal crisis.
And you can't just ignore them.
Right. Being a moderately empathetic human being, you close the laptop to comfort them.
Yeah.
And by the time 5 p.m. rolls around, you haven't eaten a real meal, your core work is untouched, and your energy reserves are entirely depleted.
Yeah. Nick Repek, he's the founder of Grad Resources. He actually coined a term for this specific environment. He calls it the tyranny of the urgent.
The tyranny of the urgent. Wow.
It's the phenomenon where unexpected, immediate demands constantly hijack our executive function. So that chronic bone-deep fatigue you feel at the end of a day like that isn't because you successfully executed complex work.
Right, you didn't actually do the hard thing.
No, it is the exhaustion of poor planning colliding with a total inability to shield yourself from secondary distractions.
And that collision produces one of my favorite concepts from the source material, which is workcrastination.
Workcrastination. It's a brilliant label.
It really is. It's when you aggressively tackle easy, non-critical tasks like color-coding a spreadsheet or answering trivial Slack messages instead of doing the heavy lifting of your actual project. I like to think of workcrastination as actively digging a hole to avoid climbing a mountain.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. You are sweating, you are typing fast, you look incredibly busy to anyone walking by, but you are just chasing the cheap dopamine hits of checking off tiny tasks. You're getting further and further away from the summit.
And the dopamine angle is precisely why it's so dangerous. It successfully mimics the feeling of productivity while leaving the actual source of your anxiety completely unresolved.
Which just compounds the stress.
Exactly. A systematic review published in Frontiers in Education highlights the severe downstream effects of this habit. Effective time management, or the lack thereof, isn't just about corporate output metrics. It is fundamentally tied to human well-being.
How so?
Well, the research shows that mastering this self-regulated process is linked to higher GPAs for students and better professional motivation. But more importantly, it results in significantly lower rates of clinical anxiety, depression, and systemic burnout.
So it's literally a health issue. So if we know our brains are biologically hardwired to default to cheap dopamine-like, to dig that hole whenever we feel overwhelmed, how do we short-circuit that natural response?
We have to remove the decision-making burden from the heat of the moment. We systemize our intentions before the week even begins. Which brings us to the first tool in the intentionality toolkit.
Okay, lay it on me.
It is the weekly planning meeting, heavily championed by Dr. Carrie Ann Rockmore from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity.
Often called the Sunday meeting.
Yes. The premise is dedicating 30 uninterrupted minutes before the chaos of Monday morning even hits. The source breaks this down into 3 distinct steps.
The first one is building the skeleton. You open a completely blank calendar, and you block off your non-negotiable commitments first. These are the immovable walls of your week. So classes you teach, mandatory team syncs, picking your kids up from daycare. You map the hard borders so you know exactly how much space you actually have.
And once the skeleton is in place, you move to step 2, which is the brain dump.
Literally just dumping it all out.
Exactly. You take a blank piece of paper and write down absolutely everything you think you need to accomplish that week. And what's fascinating here is the underlying cognitive science.
No, do tell.
We are utilizing a psychological principle to reduce your cognitive load. Your working memory functions very much like the RAM in a computer.
Okay, I track with that.
If it is constantly running anxious background programs, reminding you to email a client or draft an introduction or pay a bill, it aggressively bogs down your active processing power.
Like having too many tabs open in your browser.
Precisely. By physically offloading those tasks onto paper, you silence those background loops. That frees up your prefrontal cortex to actually engage in deep, complex work.
Seeing it on paper just immediately drops the baseline anxiety because you don't have to hold it all in your head anymore.
Exactly.
But then we hit step 3, task assignment, where you prioritize that massive brain dump list and map the specific tasks into the empty blocks of your weekly skeleton. And here's where I have to push back on the source material a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
It introduces this thing called the planning fallacy, our natural tendency to woefully underestimate how long things take.
Yeah.
The suggested rule of thumb is to multiply your initial time estimate by 3.
Yes, the rule of 3.
Wait, hold on. If I think drafting a report takes 1 hour, I need to block out 3 hours. If I multiply every single task by 3, my calendar fills up after, like, 2 tasks. My boss is not going to accept that I'm only accomplishing 2 things this week. That feels like scheduling failure before I even start.
I completely understand the friction there. The pushback is natural because it directly challenges our professional ego.
Ouch. But fair.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the massive gap between imagined productivity and actual output. Human beings construct timelines based on best-case scenarios.
Like everything is going to go perfectly.
Exactly. We imagine a vacuum where the software doesn't crash, nobody interrupts us, and the words just flow perfectly. We never factor in the cognitive friction of just starting.
Okay, that makes sense.
When you try to cram 10 tasks into an unrealistic schedule, you end up carrying 9 of them over to the next day, and the next day living in a constant state of guilt and missed deadlines.
Which is miserable.
It is. When you book realistic, expanded blocks, you actually finish the task. You replace the illusion of volume with the reality of completion.
Wow, so it's forcing you to confront your actual capacity rather than your aspirational capacity?
Precisely. And the crucial behavioral shift in step 3 is that once those expanded blocks are locked on the calendar, you must treat them as literal meetings with yourself.
Meetings with yourself, I like that.
You would never arbitrarily cancel a strategy meeting with your CEO or your thesis advisor just because you felt an urge to clean out your email.
Definitely not.
You have to grant your own priorities that exact same level of untouchable respect.
Okay, so we've successfully offloaded the cognitive RAM onto a perfectly structured calendar. The skeleton is there, the tasks are realistically assigned, but, I mean, a perfect calendar doesn't change human biology.
No, it doesn't.
If I schedule my most complex, intensive strategic writing for 4 p.m. on a Thursday, I will be sitting at my desk, but my cognitive battery will be entirely dead. How do we sync this beautiful calendar with our actual energy levels?
This is where the methodology evolves from simply managing time to managing cognitive capacity. Tool number 2 is called Pay Yourself First. This is a concept adapted for academic workflows by experts like Dr. Raul Pacheco-Vega and Peg Boyle-Single.
Wait, pay yourself first.
Yeah.
It borrows the language of personal finance, but applies it to your brain.
The principle is identical. In a demanding environment, if you wait to tackle the heavy intellectual lifting, the deep data analysis, the nuanced writing, until after you have cleared your inbox, answered team questions, and processed admin paperwork, you will never accomplish the deep work.
Because you're tapped out.
Your cognitive energy will be bankrupt by 2 p.m. You have to pay yourself first by deliberately scheduling your most intellectually demanding tasks during your peak biological energy hours, which, for a majority of the population, is first thing in the morning.
Paying yourself first makes logical sense, but it immediately collides with a massive myth that the source material calls out. And it is a trap I see brilliant people fall into all the time, the illusion of the magical free day.
Yes. Wendy Laura Belcher explores this extensively in her work on academic writing. We cultivate this deeply romanticized notion that in order to produce meaningful, complex work, we require a massive, uninterrupted 4 to 5 hour block of pristine time.
Yes. We literally tell ourselves, I can't possibly start this massive literature review today. I only have 45 minutes between meetings. I'll just wait until Friday when my schedule is completely clear.
But Friday never stays clear.
Never.
The tyranny of the urgent always aggressively reclaims that space. Waiting for these magical free days is the primary catalyst for writer's block, heightened anxiety, and intense procrastination.
So what's the fix?
The solution isn't magically generating more time. It is cultivating a daily habit of just 30 to 60 minutes of hyper-focused work.
And the sources provide some fantastic tactical solutions to force this habit. The Pomodoro technique is widely known, right? Working intensely with 0 distractions for 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break to let the neural pathways rest, and then taking a longer break after 4 cycles.
Right, very effective.
But the one I find far more compelling is the Swiss cheese technique.
Right.
Breaking massive projects down into tiny, bite-sized 15 to 20-minute chunks.
Yes, poking holes in it.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The Swiss cheese technique isn't just a scheduling trick. It is a psychological hack to bypass the amygdala's threat response.
Oh, say more about that.
When you stare at a calendar block that says, write 50-page literature review, your brain perceives that massive mountain of effort as a literal threat. It panics, and it drives you to go dig a hole for cheap dopamine instead.
Back to work-crastination.
Right. But if you tell your brain, look, we aren't climbing a mountain, we're just going to spend 15 minutes poking a tiny hole in this project by outlining 3 bullet points, it lowers the emotional stakes.
It absolutely does.
It's so much easier to bypass the fear response for a 15-minute commitment. You just keep poking holes in the cheese until suddenly the structural integrity of the project gives way and it's done.
You're completely disarming the barrier to entry. You don't need a 5-hour stroke of genius. You simply need the discipline to start for 15 minutes.
Okay, so we have the schedule from the weekly planning meeting, and we've synced it with our biology by paying ourselves first. We're successfully poking holes in the cheese.
So far, so good.
But then Tuesday morning happens. The real world attacks, and other people demand your attention. How do you defend this newly structured time when colleagues or managers or peers are constantly throwing crises at your desk?
You need an objective filtering mechanism. Tool number 3 introduces the Eisenhower matrix.
Okay, I think I've seen this one.
Most professionals are familiar with the basic concept. It's categorizing incoming demands into 4 quadrants based on urgency and importance. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important, you do it immediately. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important, you delegate or delay. Quadrant 4 is neither, you eliminate it.
Right, we've all seen the 2x2 grid in a corporate seminar somewhere. But the true psychological trap of the matrix doesn't lie in the extremes. The magic and, honestly, the danger lives in Quadrant 2.
Yes. Quadrant 2 houses tasks that are important but not urgent. This is the home of deep research, long-term strategic planning, career-defining dissertation writing.
The big stuff.
The very big stuff. And this raises an important question. If this quadrant contains the work that actually advances our careers and fulfills our potential, why does it constantly get ignored?
Because it's quiet. It doesn't scream at you.
Exactly that. It lacks an immediate external daily deadline. If you choose not to write a chapter of your dissertation today or, delay drafting that major proposal, nobody's going to burst into your office and fire you on the spot.
Right, there's no immediate consequence.
Therefore, Quadrant 2 gets constantly steamrolled by the loud, screaming, low-value, urgent tasks of Quadrant 1 and 3 that have a person physically waiting on the other end.
But let's get highly tactical here, because it's one thing to philosophically agree that we need to protect Quadrant 2, but it is deeply uncomfortable in practice.
It's very hard.
How do I actually look a colleague or a boss in the eye and say no to an urgent request without sounding like an arrogant, unhelpful jerk?
You use the physical calendar you built during your Sunday meeting as a shield. It removes the personal emotion and the guilt from the refusal.
How does that sound in practice?
You are not rejecting the person or diminishing their crisis. Your structural reality simply cannot accommodate the request. The sources provide a highly effective script for this exact moment. You tell them, my calendar is fully committed to my core milestones this week, but I can look at this starting next Thursday.
Wow. It's a remarkably clean boundary.
Yeah.
You aren't flatly saying, I refuse to do this. You are communicating, I am a professional who honors my existing commitments and my capacity is currently full.
Yes.
It implicitly signals to the requester that your time is a highly valuable, finite resource.
And it forces the requester to evaluate their own emergency. They have to decide if their task is actually important enough to wait for your expertise next Thursday or if it's just a fleeting urgency they can solve themselves.
That's a great point.
As the sources bluntly remind us, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. You fundamentally cannot say yes to every external demand without actively sacrificing the very Quadrant 2 work you are hired to accomplish.
Defending the calendar against external threats is a massive step. But there is one final crucial piece to this framework. Defending your calendar is one thing, but defending your physical biology from your own ambition is another.
We enter the maintenance phase. The source material frames this using Stephen Covey's well-known woodcutter analogy, the concept of sharpening the saw.
Yeah, I know we've all heard the sharpen the saw metaphor 1,000 times in every self-help book ever printed. You see a guy frantically sawing at a tree for 5 hours. You tell him to stop and sharpen the blade, and he yells, I don't have time to sharpen the saw, I'm too busy sawing.
Right, it's a classic.
It feels like a cliche. But looking at the actual empirical data provided in the sources makes it less of a cliche and much more of a strict biological mandate.
The data strips the cliche away entirely. The source highlights research showing that when deeply cognitive or academic work exceeds 50 hours a week, individual productivity does not just plateau, it drops off a precipice.
50 hours, that's the limit.
Yes. Pushing yourself to sit at a desk for 70 hours does not linearly yield 20 additional hours of high-quality output. It yields severe diminishing returns, an increase in structural errors, and rapid onset burnout.
So you're actually doing worse work.
Much worse. The realization we must internalize is that you are the saw. Your prefrontal cortex and your physical nervous system are your primary tools of production. If you refuse to pause and care for the machinery, your output will grind to a halt.
It is deeply counterintuitive for high achievers. The idea that you have to aggressively step away from the work in order to produce more work.
But that's true.
It maps perfectly back to the pay yourself first methodology, though. You literally cannot pour from an empty cup. If the saw is dull, you are just grinding hot metal against wood and damaging the blade.
To prevent that damage, the sources break maintenance down into 4 specific, non-negotiable dimensions of well-being. First is the physical dimension, treating sufficient sleep, nutrient-dense food, and regular movement not as luxuries, but as foundational maintenance for your cognitive engine.
And these are always the absolute first things we sacrifice when the calendar gets tight. We trade an hour of sleep for an hour of digging a hole.
Which accelerates the burnout. The second dimension is mental. And in this context, it doesn't solely mean mental health interventions, but actively giving your brain a true cognitive break.
Like watching TV.
More like engaging in reading for pleasure, or immersing yourself in a hobby entirely outside your professional domain, so the specific neural pathways you use for work can repair themselves.
Got it. Third is the social and emotional dimension. Deliberately surrounding yourself with supportive networks, establishing accountability partners, and investing time in relationships that recharge your battery rather than drain it.
Essential. And finally, the spiritual dimension. which does not necessarily denote organized religion, but rather the practice of connecting your daily granular habits to your core, overarching personal purpose.
So remembering the big picture.
It is the practice of consciously remembering why you are willingly putting yourself through such a rigorous, demanding process in the first place.
It's about pulling the camera back and keeping the 30,000-foot view in focus so you don't drown in the weeds of Tuesday's isolated stress.
Beautifully said.
All of these frameworks, the weekly planning meeting, paying yourself first, the Swiss cheese technique, the Eisenhower defense, they feel incredibly empowering when laid out sequentially. But realistically, implementation is never going to be flawless.
It never is. And expecting perfection is just another cognitive trap. Building self-regulated, highly intentional habits is an ongoing, frequently messy journey.
The sources are very pragmatic about this. You have to extend yourself some grace. There will be weeks where you run a brilliant Sunday meeting, you block your time, you pay yourself first, and the execution is flawless.
And we love those weeks.
We do. But then there will be weeks where life simply happens, the chaos wins, and your carefully constructed schedule explodes by Tuesday afternoon. When that happens, you don't abandon the system. You adjust, you recalibrate, and you start fresh the next week.
That's the secret.
The source material anchors this resilience with a quote from Winston Churchill's famously brief, deeply inspiring speech. Never give up. Never, 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 never give up.
A great reminder.
So what does this all mean for you?
If we synthesize everything we've explored today, I think it leaves us with a profound foundational shift in perspective. We spend so much of our professional lives obsessing over budgeting our time.
Right, every minute accounted for.
We track our hours, we optimize our minutes, we color code our calendars, but we spend almost zero conscious effort budgeting our cognitive load. Think back to that painful scenario from the very beginning where the entire day unraveled into workcrastination and exhaustion.
Still gives me highs thinking about it.
What if, starting tomorrow morning, you began tracking your energy instead of your time? If you identified the exact biological moment your brain is sharpest, scheduled your absolute hardest task for that specific window, and ruthlessly protected it, how many of those mythical, elusive, magical free days would you realize you never actually needed in the first place?
That is a brilliant and provocative question to leave off on. Stop waiting for the perfect uninterrupted day and start engineering the perfect 45 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go protect your time, remember to pay yourself first, and we will see you on the next one.